Millionaire CEO rejects rich women and falls in love with a poor food delivery girl. Before watching the video, please leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. The city's skyline glittered like a crown of diamonds under the velvet sky. But Daniel Reed, the billionaire CEO of Reed Enterprises, felt nothing. Inside the penthouse ballroom of the prestigious Montclair Tower, the most elite guests mingled beneath golden chandeliers and whispered behind champagne flutes. Laughter chimed like wind through crystal, polished smiles flashed like camera lenses. And yet, Daniel stood there untouched by it all. Handsome, poised, and impeccably dressed in a midnight black suit, he looked every bit the king of his empire. But behind his gray-blue eyes was a storm no one saw, a quiet, relentless ache that even his millions couldn't silence. He moved through the crowd like a ghost, nodding politely at familiar faces, enduring conversations that circled endlessly around yacht excursions in Santorini, diamond auctions in Geneva, and the scandalous diets of their third poodles. It was always the same, people obsessed with what they owned rather than who they were. Women leaned in with flirtatious intent, their laughter just a touch too loud, their perfume too strong, their eyes calculating. He had been raised among people like this, groomed to thrive in their world, but he never felt part of it. Lately, the more he accumulated, the more he questioned the worth of it all. What was the point of building empires if they couldn't fill the emptiness inside? Daniel sighed and sipped his untouched whiskey, bracing himself for yet another conversation about private jets and trust funds. But then, like a crack of thunder in a still sky, everything shifted. From the far end of the ballroom, a sharp, startled scream cut through the air. Glasses clinked. Conversations halted. All eyes turned toward the source of the commotion. A man in a white linen suit, Albert Harrington, one of the city's most feared bankers, stood soaked in what looked like deep red juice, his arms frozen mid-gesture, his expression somewhere between disbelief and fury. The vivid stain spread across his chest like a wound. In front of him stood a young woman, barely in her 20s, with wide eyes and a trembling delivery bag still slung over her shoulder. She looked like she'd walked straight out of another world. Cheap sneakers, a faded restaurant apron, her hair hastily tied back. Her lips moved, but only fragments of a sentence made it out. "Oh my God, I didn't see you. I'm so sorry." She fumbled for a napkin from her bag and began dabbing uselessly at the banker's suit. Her cheeks flushed a deep, painful red. The room, now silent, erupted into cruel laughter. "Who let that girl in here?" someone sneered. "She probably thought this was a buffet. Bet she's never even seen a suit up close." Every word landed like a blow, and Daniel could see the girl's shoulders hunch further with each cruel comment. She looked like she wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow her whole. His heart tightened, not in pity, but something else, something like recognition. The security guard arrived within seconds and reached for her arm, his voice cold and robotic. "You need to leave. Now." "I was just delivering an order. The app gave me this address. I didn't know it was a private event," she protested, but he was already pulling her away. "Let her go." The voice cut through the room like a blade. Every head turned. Daniel stepped forward. The guard stopped mid-step, stunned. So were the guests. "Mr. Reed?" the banker sputtered. "You can't be serious. Defending this delivery girl?" But Daniel ignored him. He approached the girl gently, his tone calm but firm. "What's your name?" Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm just here from Eastern Walk. I don't want any trouble." Daniel tilted his head, eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Eastern Walk? Wait, do you guys deliver yakisoba?" She blinked. "Yes, my grandmother's recipe. I helped make it." And just like that, Daniel smiled for the first time that night. The laughter faded into shocked silence. "You're the one," he said. "I've been trying to figure out who makes that dish. It's the only thing I actually enjoy eating these days." She looked confused. "Wait, what?" Daniel turned to the room, now frozen in disbelief. "I think I've found something better than all your champagne and caviar," he said dryly. Then to her, "How would you like a new job? I need a cook." Her mouth fell open. "A cook? For you? I'll pay you 3 times what you make now." The room gasped. The banker sputtered, his red-stained chest heaving. She shook her head in disbelief, then said, 5 times. Daniel raised an eyebrow, amused. You negotiate well. Only when I'm terrified. He chuckled. 4.5. She hesitated, then nodded. Deal. And just like that, the course of both their lives shifted. As the ballroom buzzed in disbelief, Daniel watched her disappear through the exit doors, apron still stained, hair a mess, and shoulders a little straighter than before. He didn't know why he'd stepped in. Maybe it was the way she didn't pretend to be anything she wasn't. Maybe it was the fire in her eyes when the world turned cruel. Or maybe in her unpolished honesty, he saw something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. And as he turned back toward the glittering crowd he no longer cared for, Daniel Reed knew something had just begun. Something real. Daniel Reed, the billionaire who had everything, power, money, legacy, had never expected his cold, calculated world to be cracked open by a girl with sauce on her apron and nervous fire in her eyes. But there he stood in the center of a glimmering ballroom, surrounded by elite investors and socialites, offering a job to a food delivery girl he didn't know, offering, in fact, a doorway into his carefully guarded life. And not just any job, a personal one, a privileged one, a space no one had ever earned just by being real. The girl, her name was Maya, stood there, blinking rapidly as if the words hadn't landed yet. Her cheeks were still red from the humiliating laughter minutes earlier when she'd accidentally spilled an entire container of red juice on one of the most powerful bankers in the city. Her hands clutched a crumpled napkin and her voice trembled, yet she didn't back away. She didn't flinch. When the room ridiculed her, she stood straighter. When the guard grabbed her arm, she pulled back, not out of arrogance, but dignity. And when Daniel offered her the job, she didn't swoon or thank him profusely. She narrowed her eyes and crossed her arms like she was bartering over vegetables in a market. 5 times more than what I make now, she had said. In that moment, Daniel didn't see a poor girl out of place at a party. He saw something most of the people around him lacked. Courage. He didn't laugh when she negotiated. He admired it. He matched her stare and replied, 4.5. That amused smile on his face wasn't just about the game. It was surprise, delight, maybe even the first flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, respect. The room gasped again, some in horror, some in fascination. The banker, still blotting his stained suit with a linen napkin, nearly choked on his own outrage. You can't be serious, he sputtered. This is a joke. She's a street cook. But Daniel had already turned his back on him. You start tomorrow, he said to Maya. And just like that, the girl who had come to deliver noodles walked out of the ballroom with a job offer from the most powerful man in the city. The murmurs followed her like smoke, but she didn't look back. Daniel watched her go with a strange flutter in his chest. Was it adrenaline, curiosity, or was it perhaps hope? The next morning, Maya woke up in the small back room of her grandmother's restaurant, Golden Bowl Cafe, tucked into a quiet corner of the city where skyscrapers gave way to laundry lines and children's laughter echoed between alley walls. The smell of garlic and soy sauce drifted in from the kitchen, and for a moment she thought it had all been a dream. But then she saw the dress she'd worn the night before draped over the chair, the red stains still visible, and the memory of that surreal evening came flooding back. Her grandmother's voice echoed through the thin wooden door. Breakfast is ready, child. Maya dragged herself up, her heart racing. How could she explain it all? Her grandmother, a woman who had worked 3 jobs after immigrating to the city, who had built their tiny restaurant dish by dish with love and pride. How would she react when Maya told her she'd taken a job in the kitchen of a billionaire? She walked into the kitchen and sat down at the small, square table as her grandmother flipped spring rolls in the pan. Without turning around, the older woman asked, So, how was that big party? Maya laughed bitterly. Let's just say I ruined a banker's suit, got kicked out, and now I work for Daniel Reed. The spatula stopped midair. What? It's not what you think, Maya said quickly. He liked our yakisoba, said he eats it every week, offered me 4.5 times what I make here. Her grandmother turned slowly, a skeptical look in her deep-lined face. You, cooking for that man. I told him it was your recipe. I just helped prepare it. He said he needs a cook, and I don't know. I said yes. There was silence. Then her grandmother went back to the stove and said softly, Do you trust him? Maya hesitated. I don't know, but he's not like the others. Not completely, at least. Her grandmother nodded. Then go. But don't let that rich boy think you can be bought. You bring your name, your pride, and our food, and if he gives you trouble, she tapped the spatula against the pan with a mischievous smile. Send him to me. Later that day, Maya stood in front of Reed Enterprises, a glass tower so tall it seemed to touch the clouds. She took a shaky breath and stepped inside. Marble floors, cold air, a sea of people dressed in expensive suits. She held her apron like a lifeline. At the reception desk, a woman with an expression carved from stone glanced at her. Can I help you? I'm Maya, Mr. Reed's new cook. The woman blinked, slowly, as if Maya had spoken in a foreign language. But after a call upstairs and a long pause, she pointed to the elevator. Top floor. The ride felt like an eternity. But when the doors opened, what she found surprised her, a private kitchen more beautiful than any she'd ever imagined. Marble counters, glass shelves, high-end appliances. And there he was, Daniel Reed, leaning casually against the island counter, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Took you long enough. I got lost 3 times, Maya admitted, stepping in cautiously. He chuckled. Let's see if you actually know how to cook. You didn't test that before hiring me? Where's the fun in that? Maya stared at him, incredulous. You're a terrible businessman. He smiled. Possibly, but I've got a good feeling. The first dish didn't go as planned. She was nervous. He was watching. She spilled too much soy sauce. The aroma filled the room, heavy and salty. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then said, Have you ever been to the ocean? Yes, because this tastes like it. Maya wanted to sink into the floor. Great, first day and I poisoned you. But instead of firing her, he laughed. It's better than anything else I've eaten this week. You passed. And that was how it began. What followed were days of chaos and discovery. Maya cooked. Daniel watched. Sometimes he helped. More often he got in the way. But every moment that they spent together felt different. He asked about her grandmother. She teased him about not knowing how to hold a knife. He brought in 5-star dishes to compare, but always went back to her yakisoba. One day she found him poking at a plate from an overpriced restaurant with the disgusted face of a child forced to eat spinach. This tastes like disappointment, he muttered. Maya laughed. Give me 5 minutes. She whipped up fried rice with chicken and a special sauce, her grandmother's Sunday recipe. When he took a bite, his eyes closed like he was remembering something he hadn't felt in years. This, he said, is home. But their quiet world wasn't going unnoticed. Whispers began to swirl, staff curious about the delivery girl now walking into the CEO's private quarters, investors skeptical of Daniel's sudden interest in simple food. And then came Miranda, the icy ex-girlfriend, gliding into the kitchen like a perfume ad. A chef? She scoffed, eyeing Maya like she was a stain on fine linen. She's better than anyone I've ever hired, Daniel said calmly. Maya smiled sweetly. Would you like me to prove it? Miranda's lips curled. I doubt you're capable of anything impressive. Maya didn't flinch. Then maybe it's time someone surprised you. And surprised they all would be. Because what began as a favor turned into a partnership, a challenge, a dream. Daniel offered to open a restaurant with her, not for publicity, not for profit, but because he believed in her food, in her. She tried to laugh it off, told him he was insane. But when he said he wanted to do it near her village, to honor her roots, she couldn't deny the truth in her chest. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a calling. Dear listener, this is just the beginning. A billionaire and a girl from the back kitchen of a village restaurant. What could they possibly build together? Love, betrayal, a new life, or all three? Will Maya rise to the challenge? Can Daniel survive in her world of flavor and fire? Stay with us, because the recipe for what comes next isn't just about food. It's about trust. It's about heart. And it's about a bond no wealth in the world could ever buy. So don't go anywhere, because the next chapter might just change everything. From the very moment Maya stepped into the glass and steel world of Reed Enterprises, she knew she didn't belong, not by their standards anyway. The heels clicked too fast. The voices were too crisp. The coffee smelled more expensive than comforting, and every face looked like it had never known hunger or sacrifice. She, on the other hand, wore calluses on her fingers from peeling ginger and garlic by hand, knew how to stretch $1 to feed 5 mouths, and had memorized every crack in the old tile floor of her grandmother's kitchen. She had no college degree, no designer clothes, no pedigree, but what she did have was a gift in her hands and a fire in her soul. Still standing there in her worn sneakers and faded apron, Maya felt small until she remembered who she was cooking for. Daniel Reed, the billionaire, the enigma, the man who saw something in her when the rest of the room saw nothing at all. But even his invitation hadn't prepared her for the battle that followed. The first few days were chaos. She cooked in his pristine private kitchen, where every appliance had buttons she didn't know how to use, and every drawer looked untouched. She tried to stay focused, but the pressure of being watched constantly, not just by Daniel, but by whispering assistants and skeptical eyes peeking in, made her hands tremble more than once. When she accidentally burned a batch of noodles, she nearly burst into tears, not because of the food, but because failure felt louder here. But Daniel didn't scold her. He just looked at her amused. "You're allowed to mess up, you know. You're not a machine." And she didn't know how to reply to that kindness. It wasn't what she was used to. Still, the others weren't as generous. Rumors started circling. They whispered in hallways, in conference rooms, in the break room where she wasn't invited. "She's just a phase," someone had said. "She's lucky he's bored. She's probably not even qualified to work a microwave." Each word chipped away at her confidence, but she kept her head high. Because she wasn't there to prove them wrong, she was there to prove herself right. Then came the first real test, a business dinner. Daniel's most important investors, 7 men and women who had never known a day without a personal chef, who expected foie gras, truffle risotto, and wine flown in from vineyards older than her grandmother's village. When Daniel announced that Maya would be preparing the food herself without help, some of the investors scoffed. "She's your cook?" one asked. "Not a caterer?" "She's better," Daniel replied without hesitation. That night, Maya stood in the back kitchen of Reed Enterprises with her heart pounding and hands shaking. She had stayed up all night preparing shrimp fritters, special fried rice, sweet and sour beef, and of course her grandmother's yakisoba, the dish that had started it all. As she plated the final dish, her hands trembling ever so slightly, she thought of her grandmother, of how she used to say, "Let the food speak for you when your words feel small." And Maya whispered to herself, "Please say something good tonight." She watched from behind the glass doors as the first plates were served. The investors took bites with blank expressions. No reaction, just chewing, swallowing, silence. And then it happened. One of the older men looked up at Daniel. "This is surprising." Another nodded. "I've never had yakisoba this good." Even Paul, Daniel's icy financial advisor who treated Maya like an accidental intern, cleared his throat and admitted, "Well, she certainly knows how to cook." Maya's breath caught in her chest. She had done it. Later that evening, when the investors left with full stomachs and raised eyebrows, Daniel walked into the kitchen with a slow clap. "You were incredible." Maya didn't cry, but she came close. But success, she would learn, didn't come with a parade. It came with expectations. The next morning, the entire building seemed to look at her differently. Some with newfound curiosity, some with cold resentment. A few assistants even tried to be friendly, but only after they knew she had impressed the board. Before that, they hadn't even looked her in the eye. It stung more than it should have. Still, she worked harder than ever. She arrived early, she experimented with recipes. She even taught Daniel how to properly cook rice. Twice. He was a disaster in the kitchen, but he never gave up. And to her surprise, he never treated her like she was beneath him. He teased, he joked, he listened, and slowly but something changed between them. There were moments, tiny, silent moments, where the air felt heavier, like when she passed him a spoon and their fingers brushed, or when he stood too close behind her, pretending to study her slicing technique, but never said a word. Or when she caught him looking at her like she was more than just a cook. But she didn't let herself feel it, because feelings were dangerous, and her world was not meant to mix with his. Then one afternoon, after weeks of quiet partnership and routine meals, Daniel walked into the kitchen with a wild spark in his eyes. Let's open a restaurant together. Maya nearly dropped the spoon she was holding. Are you insane? Probably, he said, but I'm serious. You have talent. I have resources. What if we built something real? She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. I'm just a delivery girl. No, you're not, he interrupted. You're the best chef I've ever met. And you belong in your own kitchen, not mine. The words hit her like thunder. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because for so long, all she had known was surviving, getting by, helping her grandmother, taking one shift at a time. Dreaming? That wasn't part of the plan. But Daniel made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could build something of her own. They began planning. Late nights turned into brainstorming sessions. They debated over everything, the name, the layout, the style of the menu. I want it to feel like home, Maya insisted. But also sleek, Daniel added. It has to feel new. What about flavors of the village? She offered one night. He paused, smiled. I like it. They visited possible locations, one in the city, another near her old neighborhood. Daniel leaned toward the upscale area. Maya didn't flinch. I want people from my community to be able to afford it. He nodded. Then we'll make it happen. But not everyone was thrilled. Miranda returned, this time with sharper claws. She came by the office unannounced, gliding into Daniel's office in designer heels and a manufactured smile. So this is the little chef causing all the chaos, she purred when she met Maya. Maya didn't blink. And you must be the ghost from his past. Miranda's smile faltered. Daniel stepped between them, but it was too late. The line had been drawn. Later that week, Maya received anonymous hate messages on social media, accusations, mockery, even threats. She sat in the tiny office of the Golden Bowl Cafe that night, phone in hand, heart aching. I don't belong in his world, she whispered. Her grandmother placed a hand on her shoulder. Child, maybe it's time his world changed. Then came the hardest blow. 2 days before the restaurant's soft launch, the health department showed up unannounced. Sanitary violations, they claimed, rodents, expired goods. It was a lie. Maya knew it. Daniel knew it. But the restaurant was shut down. And Maya, she broke. She cried for the first time in weeks. Alone in the kitchen, she sank to the floor and sobbed until her chest hurt. All that work, all that hope, gone. Until Daniel knelt beside her, took her hand and whispered, then we fight. What followed was a battle, a live cooking demonstration, a social media storm, a fired employee caught passing intel to Miranda, and finally an explosive news article exposing the sabotage. The city rallied around her. Maya, the street cook, had become a symbol of resilience. The restaurant reopened to record lines. And standing there behind the counter, apron tied, hair pinned back, Maya finally felt something she had never dared to believe she could feel. Pride. But the story doesn't end there, because when Daniel asked her, voice low, eyes soft, if she'd build a life with him, not just a business, Maya didn't hesitate. This was no longer about food. It was about heart. They say when you're finally chasing your dream, the world tests you to see if you really mean it. For Maya, that test came fast, hard, and in heels. 5-inch designer heels worn by none other than Miranda Calloway, Daniel Reed's ex-girlfriend, elegant, polished, dangerous. The kind of woman who never had to cook a meal in her life and still judged the texture of risotto as if she invented it. And from the very moment Miranda laid eyes on Maya, the girl who once spilled juice on a banker in a borrowed apron, it was war. Maya didn't ask for it. All she ever wanted was to cook honest food, open a modest restaurant, and maybe believe that she could build something real with someone like Daniel. But in Miranda's world, women like Maya weren't supposed to be seen, let alone succeed. I'm just here for business, Miranda had said one morning, breezing into the half-finished restaurant like it already belonged to her, helping Daniel with some old investments. But Maya could see it in her eyes, the way Miranda scanned the walls, the furniture samples, even the menu designs. Not with interest, with contempt. You think you can turn this little shack into something that belongs in the city? Miranda had asked casually, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Maya, brushing flour off her apron, simply said, I'm not trying to fit into your city. I'm building something for people like me. Oh, darling, Miranda chuckled. You think people want to pay for poverty on a plate? Maya didn't respond. Not with words, anyway. She went back to kneading dough, because if there weren't one thing her grandmother taught her, it was this. Let your hands speak louder than their insults. But Miranda wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The next few weeks were brutal. The restaurant build-out ran into delays. Contractors quit mid-project. Equipment mysteriously went missing. And every time Maya tried to push forward, someone, seemed to push back harder. Daniel did his best to shield her, but even he couldn't stop everything. I don't get it, Maya said one night, slamming a box of sample menus onto the table. Why does she care so much? Daniel looked tired, because she's not used to losing. And what am I? A threat? He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, and that answer scared her more than she cared to admit. But Maya wasn't built to back down. She had survived too many years of being underestimated, ignored, dismissed. And this restaurant, it wasn't just a business, it was her legacy, her grandmother's flavors, her community's soul. So when Miranda invited them to cater an exclusive charity gala at the Grand Solace Hotel, a chance to introduce Maya's food to the city's elite, everyone, including Daniel, was suspicious. It's a trap, he said. She wants to humiliate you. Then let her try, Maya replied, jaw clenched. Because if this was the battlefield Miranda wanted, Maya wasn't going to fight with gossip and games. She was going to fight with food. The day of the gala arrived like thunder. Maya and her team arrived early, arms full of fresh ingredients and carefully prepared sauces. Everything had been made with ironware love and precision, each dish telling a story of the home Maya came from. As the guests arrived in gowns and tuxedos, whispering behind wine glasses, Maya stayed in the back, plating shrimp fritters and sweet tamarind noodles. And that's when it happened. She stepped out of the kitchen for just a moment to check the presentation and saw her name. Nowhere. The menu cards on every table read, Tonight's Cuisine, curated by Chef Alain Duval of Le Jardin, a man she'd never met. Her breath caught in her throat, her hands trembled. She rushed back to the kitchen and confronted the waitstaff. One of them, eyes wide with guilt, whispered, We were told to say all the food came from Chef Duval. Maya didn't need to ask who gave the order. Miranda. It wasn't enough to sabotage her name. Miranda wanted to erase her. She could have walked away right then. No one would have blamed her. She could have packed up the food, told Daniel, cried behind the dumpster, but she didn't. Instead, she marched to the stage in the center of the gala hall, where Miranda stood mid-toast, glass raised. Excuse me, Maya said, voice firm. Heads turned. Miranda's smile faltered. Darling, this isn't... But Maya cut her off. I just wanted to thank everyone for enjoying the food tonight, she said. And I wanted you to know, every dish, every flavor, every bite you loved tonight, that wasn't Chef Duval. A ripple moved through the crowd. That was me, Maya continued, and my team from a small restaurant you've never heard of. We brought our flavors, our stories, our hands. And if anyone wants proof, she gestured to the kitchen, come back and watch me cook it again. Right now. There was a stunned silence. Then slowly, applause, real applause. Even some of the guests stood. Miranda's face was a mask of fury. Daniel? He was beaming like the proudest man in the world. That night, as they packed up to leave, Maya sat on the back steps of the hotel, watching the city lights flicker. Daniel joined her, handing her a bottle of water. You didn't just cook tonight, he said. You conquered. Maya chuckled softly, exhaustion clinging to her bones. I was terrified. And you still showed up, he said. That's what makes you different. Dear listener, if your heart is racing right now, if you felt Maya's anger, her fear, and her quiet courage, let her know. Click the like button if you believe the world needs more women like her. And in the comments, just type, You did it, Maya, to show her you're behind her. Because she may be fictional, but the feeling, the fire, the fight, that's real. She fought not with bitterness, but with bravery. Not with power, but with purpose. And the story's not over yet, because after the gala, Maya's name was everywhere. Food blogs, news articles. Influencers who'd once ignored her now called her the rising star of culinary soul food. The restaurant, now booked for 3 months in advance, and it hadn't even opened yet. But Maya knew better than to let her guard down. because success doesn't silence enemies. It awakens them. And Miranda, she wasn't done. Just 2 days later, an article appeared. Street cook or scammer? Investigations into Maya's credentials. Fake headlines. Lies about her past. Accusations of using Daniel's wealth to play chef. She held the phone in her trembling hands, staring at the screen in disbelief. Daniel burst into the kitchen minutes later. I'm on it, but Maya felt like she couldn't breathe. Why is this happening? Why do they hate me so much? Daniel reached for her, but she pulled away. I don't want to be famous, she whispered. I just wanted to cook. And maybe some of you listening right now, you know that feeling. You work hard. You build something. You give your heart to it. And still, someone tries to break you down. Not because you're wrong, but because you dared to rise. If that's ever been you, leave a comment below and tell us. What dream did you refuse to let die? Let Maya's story remind you, you're not alone. Daniel's legal team fought back. And Maya, she cooked through it all. Every day she arrived early, stirred sauces, rolled dumplings, smiled through interviews she never asked for. She refused to disappear. Until finally the truth surfaced. A leaked email trail proved that Miranda had hired someone to fabricate the story. The article was taken down. Apologies were posted. And Maya? She didn't gloat. She didn't sue. She just went back to her kitchen, tied on her apron, and said quietly, let's open the doors. Opening day arrived like a sunrise after a storm. The restaurant, Flavors of the Village, was more than just a place to eat. It was a home. The walls were lined with photos of Maya's childhood. The menu told stories in every dish. And when the first customers walked in, they were greeted not by a hostess in heels, but by Maya herself, apron on, hands flour-dusted, smile genuine. The line stretched around the block, and outside, standing in the crowd, was Maya's grandmother, eyes filled with tears, heart full of pride. Daniel stood beside her. Your granddaughter, he said, is magic. She nodded. She always has been. The world's just finally tasting it. They say the spotlight is warm until it burns. At first for Layla, it felt like sunshine, gentle, golden, and surreal. After everything she'd been through, from delivering noodles in a torn apron to standing side by side with a billionaire inside their own restaurant, she had finally found her light. Sabres de Layla had opened to overwhelming success. The line wrapped around the block, cameras flashed outside, and the scent of garlic, ginger, and hope drifted into the street like a silent celebration. For a girl who once believed she'd never be more than a delivery girl in a fading family restaurant, it felt like a miracle. But fame, Layla would soon learn, comes with a different kind of hunger. One that doesn't want to be fed, it wants to devour. At first, it was thrilling. Food bloggers couldn't stop talking about her handmade noodles. Local news stations featured her as the heart of the city. She was invited to culinary panels, photographed for magazine covers. Strangers recognized her on the street. Customers brought flowers. Some even brought tears, saying her food reminded them of home, of mothers long gone, of memories they thought they'd lost. For a woman who had built her life out of flour and flame, it was almost too much. And then the whispers started. She's just a pretty face cooking peasant food. She only made it because of Richard. She's a fraud. At first, Layla ignored them. After all, people talked, but the whispers grew louder, colder. She saw the shift in glances, the way some customers filmed her without asking, the way employees flinched when her name came up in meetings. And then came the articles. Street chef or social climber? From apron to affluence, the questionable rise of Layla Soriano. Insider accuses Sabres de Layla of plagiarized recipes. None of it was true, not a word. But truth in the world of media storms was quieter than rumor. Layla sat in the back room of the restaurant one evening, phone trembling in her hand, rereading a message from an anonymous account. Hope your kitchen burns like your lies. Her stomach twisted. She thought of her grandmother, now retired, finally resting after decades of hard work. Of the small back room where she used to sleep, sharing a bunk with spices and bags of rice. She hadn't chased fame. She had chased freedom. And now it felt like the very thing she had built her life upon was being pulled from under her. Richard walked in quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. You didn't come out front. She didn't look up. I couldn't. They're lies. She nodded slowly. But lies have teeth. He set the tea down and knelt in front of her, his voice softer than usual. I didn't choose you because I felt sorry for you. I chose you because you're better than all of them. Her eyes filled with tears. What if I'm not strong enough for this? You are, he said. But maybe it's time they saw it with their own eyes. That's when the idea was born. Not from strategy, not from PR, but from Layla's fire. From the same grit that helped her carry hot food on cold nights. From the same soul that made her food unforgettable. She was going to cook, live, in front of anyone who dared to question her. No edits, no tricks, just me, my hands, my truth, she said. Richard raised an eyebrow. You're going to turn the restaurant into a live kitchen? No, she replied. I'm going to turn it into a battlefield. The next week, Layla announced the event on social media. Come watch the fire. Layla cooks live. No scripts, no sous chefs, just passion. The response was instant. Some called it a stunt. Others called it brave. But one thing was certain. Everyone was talking. The restaurant overflowed. Journalists lined the walls. Influencers elbowed for front row seats. Layla stood in the kitchen with her apron tied tight, hair pinned back, and hands steady. She looked into the camera and smiled. They said I don't belong here. Let's prove them wrong. She started with her grandmother's dumplings, her fingers folding the dough like they were remembering their own childhood. She sautéed vegetables with quiet precision, her breath syncing with the rhythm of her knife. She told stories as she cooked, of her first job at 12, of the night she almost quit after dropping an entire pot of broth, of the time her grandmother told her, if your food makes one person cry, you've already succeeded. She finished with the yakisoba, the dish that started it all. The room was silent when she served it. 1 bite, 2, gasps, then clapping, actual clapping. The journalist who had written one of the most critical pieces stood and said, I take it back. Every word. She's not a chef, she's an artist. Dear listener, if you're saying with me, I need you to do something. If you've ever been doubted, ever been told you're not enough, ever been whispered about behind your back, leave a comment right now that says, I believe in Layla. Click the like button if you felt her pain, her pride, her power. Let her know she's not alone. Let others who hear this know they're not alone either. Because Layla stood in that kitchen not just for herself, but for all of us, for every underdog, every dreamer, every soul who chose to rise when the world wanted them small. But just as the tide turned, another storm hit. Richard received a call late that night from the National Culinary Association. A cooking competition was taking place the following month, the biggest in the country, a chance to prove Layla's talent on a national stage. But there was a twist. They wanted Richard to compete. Richard, the man who once confused sugar for salt, the CEO who had burned frozen pizza, the man who now cooked only slightly better than a distracted toddler. Layla blinked. They want you? He shrugged. They said the story would go viral, from billionaire to chef, redemption arc. She narrowed her eyes. You're going to make me regret teaching you how to fry an egg, aren't you? He smiled. Only if you agree to coach me. What followed were the most chaotic, hilarious, and heartfelt weeks of Layla's life. She taught him everything from how to hold a knife properly to how to balance spices. He cut his finger twice, burned his hand once, nearly set off the fire alarm 3 times. But he never gave up. And for every mistake, Layla was there, calm, patient, and surprisingly encouraging. The same woman who had once doubted her worth was now lifting someone else into their own light. The competition day arrived. Richard stood among world-class chefs, nervous but composed. Layla stood behind the scenes, arms crossed, pretending not to worry. He cooked like he had never cooked before. Slow, focused, careful. He recreated Layla's shrimp stir-fry, added his own twist, and delivered it with trembling hands. When the judges tasted it, the room held its breath. One of them nodded. Impressive, surprisingly balanced. Another smiled. Not bad for a CEO. He didn't win, but he came in second. And for Layla, that was a bigger victory than any trophy. Because he had believed in her, and now she had believed in him. But just as they were returning home, ready to enjoy the calm after the storm, the worst blow came. An anonymous report to the health department. Sabres de Layla was accused of using expired ingredients. An anonymous source claimed the kitchen was unsafe. Photos were leaked, edited, forged, ugly lies. And just like that, the doors were shut. Layla stood outside her own restaurant, reading the notice taped to the glass door. Her hands were cold. Her breath came out in gasps. Richard stood beside her, jaw clenched. "We'll fight this." But Layla didn't speak. She was exhausted. Exhausted from smiling when she wanted to scream. From working harder just to be told she didn't deserve it. From cooking her heart into every dish, only to have someone try to destroy it all. But the next morning, she returned to the kitchen. Not the closed one downtown, but her grandmother's. She rolled out dough, stirred broth, breathed, and then she looked at Richard and said, "If they want to take the restaurant, we'll take the food to the people." What happened next was a movement. Pop-up kitchens, community food drives, online orders. People rallied behind her. Her face appeared on shirts, hashtags, murals. Because Layla wasn't just a chef anymore. She was a symbol, a reminder that truth can be forged in fire, that love can rise from the ashes of doubt, and that no lie, no sabotage, no scandal can stop a heart that has already decided to give everything. They say love should be simple, two hearts, one rhythm. But for Layla, nothing about her growing feelings for Richard Reed, the billionaire who had upended her quiet life, felt simple. It felt terrifying. Because falling in love with a man like Richard wasn't like falling at all. It was like free falling into a sky she had no wings for. He belonged to a world of clean-cut suits and glittering city lights, of five-star meetings and signature wines, while she came from a cramped kitchen behind a humble family restaurant, where her grandmother still rolled dumplings by hand and the only silver she touched was a scratched old spoon passed down through generations. And yet, somewhere between arguments over soy sauce measurements and shared laughter over failed attempts at gourmet omelets, Layla felt her walls begin to crumble. Richard wasn't just her business partner anymore. He was becoming her safe place, her unexpected joy, the one person who saw her not as a project, not as a novelty, but as a person. But even as her heart leaned toward him, her mind warned her to run. Because how could a man like him, who once walked red carpets with actresses and mingled with heiresses who wore diamonds like skin, truly love someone like her? That fear whispered to her in quiet moments, in the back of cabs, in the mirror before meetings, in the way some people still looked at her with thinly veiled disdain. And no moment tested that fear more than the night Richard asked her to dinner. Not business, not strategy, just dinner, just him and her. It was after a long day at the restaurant. They'd survived a lunch rush, trained two new hires, and argued over whether Spicy Grandma's Chicken was an appropriate name for a menu item. Layla was cleaning the counter when Richard walked in, his tie loosened and something different in his expression, something gentle. "I want to take you out," he said. She blinked. "Out, like outside, like to the street?" He smiled. "No, a proper dinner, just the two of us." She looked down at her flower-streaked apron, at her chipped nails and worn-out sneakers, and laughed nervously. "You want me to eat at one of your fancy places, dressed like this?" "I want you, Layla," he said quietly. "However you show up." And in that moment, something broke inside her. Not in a painful way, in a way that felt like light shining through old cracks. That evening, she stood in front of her closet, if you could call it that, holding the only dress she owned that didn't smell like garlic or oil. Her hands shook as she applied lipstick, something she rarely wore. She felt silly, awkward, unworthy. But when she walked into the rooftop restaurant where Richard waited, dressed in a soft navy suit and no tie, his eyes softened the moment he saw her. "You look," he began, searching for the right word. "Out of place," she offered with a smile. "Beautiful," he finished. And for the first time that night, she let herself believe he meant it. The dinner was slow, thoughtful, filled with conversation that danced between laughter and silence. They talked about childhoods, about dreams, She told him about the time she burned an entire pot of rice when she was 8 and still cried over it. He told her about the first time he closed a business deal and felt nothing, no thrill, no pride, just a void. They were from different planets, but somehow their hearts beat in the same quiet language. And then, just as dessert arrived, the flashes started. Cameras, paparazzi, questions. Mr. Reed, is this your new girlfriend? Layla, how does it feel to be dating a billionaire? Is this a publicity stunt or something real? Layla froze. Her hands trembled. Richard stood, shielding her as best he could, but the moment was ruined. By the time they escaped into the car, the tension had thickened into silence. I'm sorry, he said finally. She didn't answer, because it wasn't just the flashes or the questions. It was what they meant. It was the world reminding her she didn't belong. That even here, with him, her presence would always raise eyebrows and provoke judgment. The next morning, the internet exploded. Billionaire CEO and street cook. Romance or PR ploy? From takeout to takeover. Who is Layla Soriano? Her phone didn't stop buzzing. Her grandmother called, concerned. Are you in trouble, my child? No, Grandma, she whispered. I think I'm in something scarier. I think I'm in love. And that's when it hit her. She was, completely, helplessly, hopelessly, and that terrified her more than the cameras ever could. She tried to pull away after that, avoided late-night kitchen talks, refused invitations to coffee, focused on numbers, staff, supply chain issues, anything to keep her heart distracted. But Richard saw through it. He watched her carefully, giving her space, until one evening he showed up at her apartment with nothing but a note. It read, Don't run away. I'll be waiting for you at the Grand Imperial Hotel, 7 p.m. She almost didn't go. She sat on her bed, dressed in pajamas, hands tangled in her lap, until her grandmother walked in with 2 cups of tea and a raised eyebrow. What are you so afraid of? She asked. That he'll break me, Layla whispered. Or that he won't, her grandmother said, and you'll have no excuse left to keep hiding. At 6:59 p.m. Layla stepped into the Grand Imperial Hotel. She spotted Richard at a private table in the corner, looking up just as she entered. No cameras, no audience, just them. You came, he said. I still haven't decided if it's a mistake. He smiled. Sit down, let's find out together. They sat, talked, fell into an old rhythm. But when dessert arrived, Richard set down his fork and looked her straight in the eyes. I need to tell you something. She braced herself. I've spent most of my life surrounded by people who want things from me. Money, attention, access. And then you walked in. Not asking for anything. Just being you. And for the first time, I felt something real. Richard, I like you, Layla. I care about you. And I don't care where you're from, what shoes you wear, or if your hands smell like ginger all the time. Actually, I kind of like that. She laughed, barely, and tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. This doesn't make sense, she whispered. I don't fit into your life. Then let's build a new one, he said, one that fits us both. And in that moment, she let go of every doubt, every whisper, every wound. She leaned across the table, cupped his cheek, and kissed him. Not a kiss for the cameras, not a kiss to prove anything. Just them. Dear listener, if you're still here, I want you to pause and take a breath. Because maybe this story isn't just about Layla. Maybe it's about you. Maybe you've loved someone who felt out of reach. Maybe you've stood in rooms you were told you didn't belong in. Maybe you've looked at yourself in the mirror and wondered if you were enough. And if that's true, leave a comment below that simply says, I am enough. Click like if Layla's courage reminded you to believe again. Share this story with someone who's doubting their worth. Let them know that love isn't about status, it's about truth. Because Layla didn't win Richard over with designer gowns or social connections. She won him with dumplings, laughter, and a heart that never pretended to be anything but real. But of course, love, like anything precious, would soon be tested. In the next chapter, their relationship is pushed into the public eye. A scandal erupts, a betrayal lurks where they least expect it. Will their love survive? Will Layla hold on to the truth she finally accepted? Or will the world she fought so hard to rise and tear her apart? Stay with us, dear friend, because the next part of Layla's story will take your breath away, and she'll need your voice more than ever. The day of the wedding arrived not with fanfare, but with sunlight slipping through the trees and laughter floating in the breeze. Simple, quiet, real. There were no limousines, no velvet ropes, no grand ballrooms lit by chandeliers. Instead, there was Layla's village, her grandmother's garden, in the hands of the very people who had watched her grow, now stringing flowers between trees and tying ribbons to folding chairs. It wasn't a spectacle. It was a storybook day written by the hands of love itself. Layla stood barefoot in the same room she used to share with sacks of jasmine rice and a single cracked mirror. Her dress wasn't custom made in Paris. It was sewn by her aunt over 2 weeks, lace trim carefully stitched by candlelight, fitted over hours of laughter and teasing and tears. Her hair was loose, natural, a few soft curls tucked behind her ear with a sprig of baby's breath. And across the village courtyard, in a crisp white shirt with his sleeves rolled up, stood Richard Reed, no longer the icy CEO she once feared, no longer the untouchable billionaire surrounded by bodyguards and stock reports. Today he was simply a man in love, nervous, smiling, wiping his hands on his pants as if he was about to ask for permission to love her all over again. The guests were a blend of two worlds, village elders sitting beside suited executives, Richard's old colleagues awkwardly holding plates of spicy tamarind chicken, while Layla's childhood friends taught them how to dance barefoot on dirt. And in that beautiful chaos, nobody cared where anyone came from. All that mattered was where they had arrived, together. As Layla walked down the aisle, arm in arm with her grandmother, the tears came, not just to her, but to nearly everyone. Not because of the dress or the music, but because this moment, this union, was proof that sometimes love does find its way across the impossible. When the vows came, Richard took Layla's hands in his and said, voice steady but full of emotion, "You taught me what richness really means. It's not what I've built. It's what I've felt with you. You showed me the strength in softness, the power in honesty, and the joy in simplicity. And I promise for the rest of my life to never forget what you've given me, the courage to be real." And Layla, holding his gaze with trembling lips, replied, "I thought I had to stay small to survive. But you made space for me to grow. Not by changing who I am, but by loving me because of who I am. And I promise for the rest of my life to keep building a home with you, plate by plate, word by word, heart by heart." The applause wasn't loud. It was soft, tender, carried by the wind and the clinking of teacups nearby. And when they kissed, it wasn't for the cameras. It was for them, for everything they had overcome. After the ceremony, the feast began. Not a plated dinner, but a communal celebration. Neighbors brought dishes from home. The staff from Sabore's de Layla cooked shoulder to shoulder with Layla's grandmother. Kids ran between tables. Elderly couples held hands. And at the head table, Richard picked up a piece of freshly made yakisoba and smiled at his new wife. "Still the best thing I have ever tasted." Layla smirked. "You're just trying to get dessert." And everyone laughed, not because the joke was perfect, but because the moment was. Imperfect, human, heartfelt. That night, as the sun dipped behind the hills and fireflies danced in the garden, Layla stepped aside from the celebration and looked at it all. The lights, the food, the view. The man who had once been just another rich stranger, now laughing with her uncle about how spicy the chili oil was. And in that moment, she felt it wash over her. Not pride, not shock, but peace. She had done it. Not just opened a restaurant or built a name. She had stayed true to herself. She had loved without changing her roots. She had risen and remained grounded. Dear listener, if you're still here, I hope your heart feels just a little bit fuller. Because Layla's story is more than a fairy tale. It's a reminder, a gentle one, that the life we dream of isn't always found in the places we're told to chase. Sometimes it's in the little things. The food passed around a wooden table, the late-night talks in a kitchen filled with spice, the laughter shared after falling flat on your face and getting back up. And most of all, in the people who choose to stay and build with you, no matter how uneven the foundation may seem. Maybe right now you feel like Layla once did, like you don't belong in the rooms you're walking into, Like your voice is too small, your dreams too strange, or your love too complicated. But let me tell you something. You are enough. You are worthy. And your story deserves to be told. So if you connected with Layla's journey, if her courage, her kindness, her strength reminded you of your own, click the like button to show her the love she so deeply deserves. Leave a comment that says rooted and rising to stand with her and with anyone who's dared to rise without forgetting where they came from. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you want more stories just like this. Stories that touch the heart, stir the soul, and remind you that life, even when messy, is beautiful. Because in the end, what Layla taught us is this: you don't have to become someone else to become someone important. You don't have to abandon your roots to grow into your future. And you don't have to wear someone else's life to feel valuable in your own. The right people, the real people, will see you for who you are. And they'll love you because of it, not in spite of it. So as the music plays on, as Layla and Richard dance slowly under strings of warm lights, and the stars above the village blink like blessings, remember this: build where your hands feel steady, love where your heart feels safe, and always, always cook with soul. Thank you for walking this journey with us. We'll see you in the next story. But for now, let's raise a glass to Layla, to love, to home, and to you.